Video 08: How Wells Fargo created 3.5 million fake accounts. How Wells Fargo created 3.5 million fake accounts. 3.5 million. That is the number of bank accounts and credit cards that Wells Fargo employees created without their customers' knowledge or permission. For years, one of the most trusted banks in America was secretly opening accounts in people's names, moving their money without consent, and charging fees for services nobody asked for. This was not the work of a rogue employee. It was not a glitch in the system. It was a corporate culture so toxic, so obsessed with sales targets, that thousands of employees felt they had no choice but to commit fraud just to keep their jobs. This is the story of how America's favorite bank betrayed millions of its own customers. Wells Fargo has one of the most iconic brands in American banking. Founded in 1852 during the California Gold Rush, it built its reputation on trust, reliability, and community banking. The stagecoach logo was a symbol of dependability. While other banks chased risky Wall Street deals, Wells Fargo marketed itself as the common sense bank, the one that cared about Main Street, not Wall Street. During the 2008 financial crisis, that reputation paid off. While banks like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns collapsed, Wells Fargo emerged relatively unscathed. It acquired Wachovia in a deal that made it the largest bank in the United States by market capitalization. The man leading Wells Fargo through this period was John Stumpf, who became CEO in 2007. Stumpf embodied the bank's folksy image. He was from a small town in Minnesota. He spoke softly. He wore modest suits. And he repeated one mantra above all others: cross-selling. Cross-selling meant convincing existing customers to open additional accounts. If a customer had a checking account, sell them a savings account. If they had a savings account, sell them a credit card. If they had a credit card, sell them a mortgage. The internal goal was called 8 is great, meaning every Wells Fargo customer should have 8 separate financial products. Stumpf talked about cross-selling constantly. In earnings calls, in investor presentations, in employee meetings. The cross-sell ratio became the metric that Wall Street used to value Wells Fargo above its competitors. Analysts loved it. The stock price reflected it, and the entire company was built around achieving it. Inside Wells Fargo's branches, the pressure to cross-sell was relentless and crushing. Branch employees had daily sales quotas. Managers monitored performance in real time. Employees who fell behind were publicly shamed, put on performance improvement plans, or fired. The targets were aggressive and, in many branches, simply impossible to achieve through legitimate means. Employees were expected to open multiple new accounts per day. In some regions, the targets kept going up even as the customer base stayed the same. Former employees have described a work environment defined by fear. Morning meetings started with managers reading out individual sales numbers. Those at the bottom of the list were humiliated. Some branches held evening phone banks where employees were expected to cold call existing customers and pressure them into opening new products. Employees who raised concerns about the targets were ignored, retaliated against, or fired. The message was clear: hit your numbers or find another job. And so, faced with impossible targets and the threat of losing their livelihood, employees started cheating. Some opened savings accounts for customers who only wanted checking. Some created credit cards that customers never applied for. Some moved money between accounts to generate activity that triggered new account openings. Some even created accounts using fake email addresses and PIN numbers, signing customers up for services without telling them. The practice was so widespread that employees had a name for it: sandbagging. And it was not a secret inside the bank. Employees talked about it. Managers knew about it. In some cases, managers actively encouraged it. The scale of the fraud was staggering. Between 2002 and 2016, Wells Fargo employees opened approximately 3.5 million unauthorized accounts. This included 1.5 million fake deposit accounts and 565,000 unauthorized credit card applications. The bank also enrolled hundreds of thousands of customers in online bill pay services they never requested and forced unwanted insurance policies on auto loan customers. The impact on customers was real and painful. People were charged fees on accounts they did not know existed. Their credit scores were damaged by credit inquiries in delinquent accounts they never opened. Some customers had money moved out of their accounts without authorization, causing legitimate checks to bounce. Others received debt collection calls for debts they never incurred. And these were not wealthy customers who could absorb the hit. Many of the victims were ordinary working people, retirees, immigrants, and small business owners who trusted their bank to protect their money. The fraud generated relatively little revenue for the bank. Estimates suggest the unauthorized accounts produced only about $2.4 million in fees. For a bank with revenues exceeding $80 billion per year, this was pocket change. The fraud was not about making money. It was about hitting sales targets to keep Wall Street happy and stock prices high. Whistleblowers tried to raise the alarm. As early as 2002, employees and lower-level managers reported the fake account practices through internal ethics hotlines. Many of them were fired for reporting the problems. One former employee, who reported the fraud in 2010, was terminated and struggled to find work in banking for years afterward. The scandal finally came to public light in 2013 when the Los Angeles Times published a series of investigative reports detailing the fake account practices at Wells Fargo branches in Southern California. The articles described a culture of pressure and fear that drove employees to commit fraud. The city of Los Angeles sued Wells Fargo in 2015, and in September 2016, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and the Los Angeles City Attorney announced a settlement. Wells Fargo agreed to pay $185 million in fines. The bank fired 5,300 employees, mostly low-level branch workers, who had been directly involved in creating fake accounts. The settlement triggered a firestorm. The public was outraged that the bank fired thousands of low-level employees while senior executives who had created and enforced the pressure cooker culture kept their jobs and bonuses. In September 2016, CEO John Stumpf was called to testify before the Senate Banking Committee. The hearing was brutal. Senator Elizabeth Warren told Stumpf that he should resign, return his stock gains, and face criminal investigation. She said he had personally made $200 million while the fraud was happening. Stumpf's defense was unconvincing. He called the fake accounts the work of bad apples and claimed that the problem had been addressed. He refused to accept personal responsibility and would not commit to returning his compensation. The backlash was swift. On October 12, 2016, John Stumpf resigned. The board clawed back $41 million of his compensation. His successor, Tim Sloan, also eventually resigned in March 2019 under continued pressure. The consequences for Wells Fargo extended far beyond the initial $185 million fine. In February 2018, the Federal Reserve took the unprecedented step of placing an asset cap on Wells Fargo, prohibiting the bank from growing beyond its current size until it could demonstrate that it had fixed its internal problems. This cap cost the bank billions in potential revenue and remained in place for years. Additional fines and settlements followed. The bank eventually paid over $3 billion in fines to federal agencies. It settled class action lawsuits with customers. It was forced to refund tens of millions of dollars in unauthorized fees. The total cost of the scandal exceeded $4 billion. In 2020, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency banned 8 former executives from the banking industry. John Stumpf agreed to pay a $17.5 million fine and was permanently banned from banking. The head of community banking, Carrie Tolstedt, who oversaw the division where most of the fraud occurred, was charged with obstructing a bank examination. She eventually paid a $3 million fine, but no senior executive went to prison, despite a fraud that affected millions of customers over more than a decade. The criminal consequences fell almost entirely on the low-level employees who were fired. The same people who had been pressured by the very executives who escaped prosecution. The Wells Fargo scandal changed how regulators think about corporate culture. It proved that fraud does not always come from the top through explicit orders. Sometimes it comes from a culture so focused on metrics that employees feel compelled to cheat just to survive. And it raised a question that still has no satisfying answer. When a company creates a system that incentivizes fraud, who is really responsible? If this story shocked you, you are going to want to see what comes next. This channel is dedicated to exposing the biggest frauds, scams, and corporate scandals in history. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an episode of the Fraud Files. And if you think Wells Fargo was reckless, wait until you hear about the car company that installed secret software in 11 million vehicles to cheat emissions tests, poisoning the air while claiming to be green. That story is coming next. Video metadata. Title: How Wells Fargo Created 3.5 Million Fake Accounts. Description: Wells Fargo employees secretly opened 3.5 million unauthorized bank accounts and credit cards in customers' names. Driven by impossible sales targets and a toxic corporate culture, thousands of employees committed fraud just to keep their jobs. When the scandal broke, the bank paid billions in fines, but no senior executive went to prison. This is the full story of one of the biggest banking frauds in American history. Hashtag Wells Fargo, hashtag banking fraud, hashtag fraud, hashtag fake accounts, hashtag the fraud files, hashtag corporate scandal, hashtag consumer fraud, hashtag documentary. Tags: Wells Fargo scandal, Wells Fargo documentary, fake accounts, banking fraud, corporate fraud, John Stumpf, cross-selling, consumer fraud, corporate scandal, fraud documentary, the fraud files, Wells Fargo explained, biggest banking fraud, Wells Fargo fake accounts.